Have you ever had this experience? You meet someone for coffee, spend an hour talking, and when you leave, you feel completely depleted, as if someone pulled your battery out and stomped on it. The strange thing is, nothing particularly bad happened during the conversation. No argument. No conflict. Just a normal interaction that somehow left you feeling exhausted to your core. Now contrast that with other people in your life, those rare individuals who, even after hours of intense conversation, leave you feeling energized, inspired, even more alive than before. It's as if they plugged you into some cosmic energy source rather than draining you dry. What explains this profound difference in how people affect our energy levels? This question fascinated one of history's greatest psychological thinkers, Carl Jung. The Swiss psychiatrist and founder of analytical psychology spent decades exploring the hidden dynamics of the human psyche, including the mysterious ways energy flows between people during interactions. Jung didn't just see this as a matter of personality types or social skills. He believed something much deeper was happening, something rooted in our unconscious minds and the complex psychological forces that shape our relationships. To understand Jung's perspective on energy-draining people, we first need to grasp his concept of psychic energy, which he called libido. When most people hear the word libido, they think of Freud and sexual energy. But Jung expanded this concept dramatically. For Jung, libido wasn't just sexual energy, it was the vital force that animates our entire psyche. It's the fundamental energy that fuels our thoughts, emotions, creativity, and connections with others. Jung saw this energy as flowing constantly throughout our psyche, moving between consciousness and the unconscious, powering our mental processes like blood powers our physical body. When this energy is blocked, depleted, or misdirected, psychological problems arise. One of Jung's most profound insights was recognizing that relationships function as energy exchanges. Every interaction involves a transfer of this psychic energy between people. Some exchanges are balanced and mutually beneficial, both people feel energized afterward. Others are dramatically unbalanced, one person walks away revitalized while the other feels depleted. Think about your own relationships. Who leaves you feeling energized? Who consistently leaves you feeling drained? According to Jung, these feelings aren't just subjective impressions, they reflect actual psychological processes occurring beneath the surface of your interactions. But what exactly is happening during these energy-draining encounters? What psychological mechanisms explain why some people seem to suck the life force right out of you? Jung identified several key psychological mechanisms that explain why certain interactions drain our energy so profoundly. The first is projection. Jung believed that we all have aspects of ourselves that we refuse to acknowledge, parts of our personality that we find uncomfortable, shameful, or threatening. Instead of facing these elements, we unconsciously project them onto others. Energy-draining people often engage in massive projection. They refuse to own their negative emotions, insecurities, or problems, instead unconsciously offloading them onto the people around them. When you interact with such a person, you're not just dealing with them, you're dealing with all their unacknowledged psychological material. No wonder you feel exhausted. Imagine a colleague who's deeply insecure about their competence but refuses to acknowledge this feeling. Instead of owning their insecurity, they constantly criticize your work, question your decisions, and undermine your confidence. What's really happening? They're projecting their own fears onto you and making you carry the emotional weight they refuse to bear. The second mechanism is emotional contagion. Emotions spread between people like viruses. When someone is filled with anxiety, resentment, or fear, these emotions radiate outward, infecting the psychological space around them. This isn't just poetic language. Research in neuropsychology has identified mirror neurons that cause us to unconsciously mimic and internalize the emotional states of those around us. When you spend time with someone dominated by negative emotions, your brain literally starts to mirror their neurological patterns. Your nervous system begins operating as if you were experiencing those negative emotions yourself. But perhaps Jung's most powerful explanation for energy drainage involves his concept of the shadow. The shadow is Jung's term for the repressed, denied aspects of ourselves, the parts of our personality that we refuse to acknowledge. It contains qualities that don't fit with our conscious self-image. If you see yourself as kind, your shadow contains your capacity for cruelty. If you identify as rational, your shadow holds your irrational impulses. When someone hasn't integrated their shadow, when they refuse to acknowledge and accept these disowned parts of themselves, they unconsciously act them out in ways that drain others. For instance, someone who denies their own anger might not express it directly. Instead, they might engage in passive-aggressive behavior, create drama, or subtly undermine others. Being around such a person becomes exhausting because you're constantly responding to both their conscious communication and the unconscious shadow material leaking into the interaction. As Jung wrote, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. The same applies to relationships. Until people make their unconscious patterns conscious, these patterns will direct their interactions and drain everyone around them. Based on Jung's insights, we can identify several archetypal patterns of energy-draining people. You'll likely recognize some of these figures from your own life. First is the victim. This person has embraced powerlessness as their identity. Nothing is ever their fault or responsibility. They constantly share their problems but reject solutions. They seek pity rather than change. The victim drains your energy by pulling you into endless cycles of rescuing and enabling, while never taking responsibility for their own well-being. As Jung might explain it, the victim has rejected their own inner strength and capacity for change, projecting that rejected power onto others and then resenting them for having what the victim denies in themselves. Next is the narcissist, perhaps the most notorious energy vampire. The narcissist demands constant attention, validation, and emotional labor. Conversations always revolve around them. They need admiration but rarely offer genuine reciprocation. They may seem charming initially, but relationships with them become increasingly one-sided energy transfers. In Jungian terms, the narcissist has failed to develop a genuine relationship with their own inner world. Instead, they use others as mirrors to reflect back a grandiose self-image, draining everyone around them in their desperate quest for external validation. Then there's the martyr, who sacrifices constantly for others but uses these sacrifices as currency to purchase guilt and obligation. "After all I've done for you," becomes their unspoken refrain. The martyr drains you by creating impossible debts that can never be repaid, turning what appears to be generosity into subtle emotional manipulation. From Jung's perspective, the martyr has rejected their own needs and desires, projecting them onto others and then resenting those others for having needs at all. The manipulator uses subtle tactics like guilt, fear, or obligation to maintain control over others' emotions. They're masters at making you feel responsible for their feelings. Interactions with manipulators leave you feeling confused, doubtful, and depleted because you're constantly navigating hidden agendas rather than engaging in authentic exchange. Jung would see the manipulator as someone who has denied their own vulnerability, projecting their fears onto others and then controlling those others to manage their own unacknowledged anxiety. Finally, there's the general category that modern pop psychology calls the energy vampire, people who seem to unconsciously sap vitality from those around them. They might monopolize conversations, dramatize minor problems, create crises, or simply fill the room with such nervous, fragmented energy that everyone feels scattered and drained afterward. What all these types share is a fundamental imbalance in energy exchange. They take far more than they give, often without conscious awareness of what they're doing. Now here's a challenging question, one that Jung would certainly ask: why do these energy-draining people keep appearing in your life? Jung believed that our outer relationships reflect our inner psychological state. If certain patterns keep repeating in your relationships, it's not random bad luck. Something in your own psyche is attracting or allowing these dynamics. First, unresolved emotional wounds often attract people who will reactivate those wounds. If you grew up with emotionally unavailable parents, you might unconsciously seek out emotionally unavailable partners. The psyche has a strange tendency to recreate its traumas in an unconscious attempt to finally heal them. As Jung put it, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. The people who drain you most effectively may be activating your deepest unresolved wounds. Second, people-pleasing tendencies and weak boundaries create a perfect environment for energy vampires to thrive. If you struggle with saying no, setting limits, or prioritizing your own needs, you're essentially hanging out a sign that says, "Drain me, I won't stop you." Jung emphasized the importance of individuation, the process of becoming a whole, differentiated self. Without this sense of self, boundaries remain weak, and others can easily exploit your emotional resources. Third, lack of self-awareness makes you vulnerable to draining relationships. If you don't recognize your own patterns and triggers, you can't protect yourself from people who activate them. You'll keep falling into the same dynamics, wondering why you feel so depleted without seeing your own role in the pattern. Finally, and perhaps most profoundly, Jung would point to your own shadow. Sometimes what drains us most in others is a reflection of something we've rejected in ourselves. The qualities that irritate us most in others are often the very qualities we refuse to acknowledge in our own personality. For instance, if you're exhausted by someone's neediness, consider whether you've rejected your own needs and vulnerability. If someone's anger drains you, examine your relationship with your own capacity for healthy anger and self-assertion. As Jung wrote, the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. Energy-draining relationships offer a painful but potentially transformative opportunity to recognize disowned aspects of yourself. Now for the practical question, how can you protect yourself from energy-draining people and relationships? Jung's psychology offers several powerful strategies. First, develop greater self-awareness. Pay attention to your energy levels after interactions. Which people consistently leave you feeling depleted? What specific behaviors trigger this depletion? What patterns do you notice across different draining relationships? Journal about these questions. Track your energy levels throughout the day. Notice what Jung called the complexes, emotional hot spots that, when triggered, lead to disproportionate energy loss. Second, set clear boundaries. Jung believed that proper psychological development requires the establishment of a strong ego, a healthy sense of self with clear boundaries. Without these boundaries, your psychic energy leaks out to anyone who demands it. Learning to say no without guilt is essential. So is recognizing when someone is crossing your emotional boundaries. Phrases like, "I can't take that on right now," "I need to think about that before deciding," or simply, "that doesn't work for me," can protect your energy from inappropriate demands. Third, actively manage your energy. Jung was fascinated by Eastern practices like meditation, which he saw as techniques for directing and conserving psychic energy. Develop your own daily practices for energy restoration. Meditation to clear psychic static and recenter your energy. Time in nature to reconnect with primal restorative forces. Creative expression to channel energy in life-giving directions. Physical movement to prevent energy stagnation. Intentional time with people who energize rather than deplete you. Fourth, and perhaps most importantly, do your shadow work. As Jung emphasized, the parts of ourselves that we refuse to acknowledge don't disappear, they operate from the unconscious, often attracting exactly the energy-draining relationships we're trying to avoid. Shadow work involves looking honestly at the qualities you reject in yourself. What traits do you most despise in others? What aspects of yourself do you try to hide? What emotions do you consider unacceptable? By acknowledging and integrating these disowned parts, you become less reactive to them in others. You develop what Jung called wholeness, not perfection, but the capacity to encompass the full range of human qualities without being controlled by them. As your relationship with your own shadow heals, you'll find yourself less susceptible to energy drainage. You'll recognize projection for what it is. You'll set boundaries more effectively. You'll gravitate naturally toward balanced, mutually energizing relationships. As we've explored today, energy drainage in relationships isn't just a subjective feeling, it reflects real psychological processes identified by Carl Jung decades ago. When someone leaves you feeling depleted, powerful unconscious mechanisms are at work: projection, emotional contagion, and shadow dynamics. We've identified the archetypal energy-draining personalities you might encounter: the victim, the narcissist, the martyr, the manipulator, and the general energy vampire. Each depletes others through different patterns, but all create fundamentally imbalanced energy exchanges. We've also looked inward, considering why we might attract or allow these draining relationships. Our own wounds, weak boundaries, lack of self-awareness, and unacknowledged shadow aspects all play crucial roles in perpetuating these patterns. Most importantly, we've explored practical strategies for protection, developing self-awareness, setting boundaries, managing your energy, and doing the essential inner work that Jung called individuation, the journey toward psychological wholeness. Remember that energy exchange happens in all relationships, but it should be relatively balanced over time. When you consistently feel depleted after seeing someone, your body and psyche are sending you important messages. Don't ignore them. As Jung wrote, "Who looks outside, dreams; who looks inside, awakes." By becoming more conscious of the unconscious dynamics in your relationships, you gain the power to transform them. You can choose connections that nourish rather than deplete you. You can recognize projection and emotional manipulation for what they are. You can set boundaries that protect your vital energy. Your energy is precious. You have every right to protect it, direct it, and share it only with those who respect its value. As Jung might say, it's not just your right but your responsibility on the path to becoming fully yourself.